I never imagined that a single television interview would bring ghosts from my past back into my life. But here I am, standing in my office, staring at the faces of people I hadn't seen in over 20 years. My family. The same people who abandoned me when I needed them the most. Now, after all this time, after all the years of silence, they've suddenly decided they want back in. And I know exactly why. But before I explain how we got here, I need you to understand the full story. My name is Ethan. I'm 44 years old, and I've been married for 10 years to a wonderful woman. We have an 8-year-old son and a life that, until recently, felt perfect. But before this chapter of my life, there was a painful one that I thought I had left behind. At 22, I married my childhood sweetheart, Amy. We had been together since middle school, and our love story seemed picture perfect. We grew up together, went to college, got stable jobs, and took the natural next step, marriage. For the first few years, everything was great. But then, something shifted. Amy became distant, withdrawn. No matter what I did to reignite the spark, she pulled further away. Then, just weeks before our third anniversary, she handed me divorce papers. No warning. No explanation beyond a hollow, "I don't love you anymore." I was blindsided, heartbroken. I begged her to tell me what had changed, but she gave me nothing. I was furious, but what could I do? If she didn't want me, I couldn't force her to stay. With no shared children and only a few assets to divide, the divorce was quick and clean. Too clean. She moved out, cut all ties, and disappeared from my life. The strangest part? So did my family. At first, I thought they were just respecting my space. But when I tried reaching out, calling, visiting, even sending letters, I was met with silence. My calls were ignored, my messages unanswered. And when I finally showed up at their doorstep, my own parents refused to let me in. The people who had raised me, who were supposed to love me unconditionally, had cast me aside as if I had never existed. And I had no idea why. Their abandonment hit me harder than the divorce. I spiraled into depression, quit my job, and spent months in a haze of self-destruction. If not for my friends, I don't know where I would be today. They refused to let me drown in my misery. They pulled me back up, urged me to focus on something, anything, to rebuild my life. And so, I threw myself into an old dream I had once shared with my family, opening my own restaurant. At the time, it seemed impossible. I had no connections, no financial backing, and no experience running a business. But I had one thing: determination. With my friends' support, I pitched my idea to investors, refined my business plan, and, after years of relentless work, I finally made it happen. The restaurant thrived. Then it expanded. One restaurant turned into 2, then 5. Soon, I wasn't just a restaurant owner, I was the CEO of a growing hospitality empire. Success didn't come easy, but it came. And with it, a new beginning. 2 years after my business took off, I met my wife. She was a guest at one of my restaurants, and fate, or maybe sheer luck, brought us together. 3 years later, I asked her to marry me. Fast forward to today, and I have everything I once thought I had lost: love, family, and a future worth fighting for. Then came the interview. It was a milestone moment, proof that I had made it. I spoke about my journey, my struggles, and the people who stood by me. I never mentioned the ones who abandoned me. And yet, they saw it. 3 days ago, my receptionist called me, her voice laced with hesitation. "Your family is here to see you," she said. For a moment, I thought she meant my wife and son. But then she added, "Your parents and your sister." My heart stopped. 2 decades of silence. And now, out of nowhere, they were here? My first instinct was to tell her to send them away. But they weren't leaving quietly. They caused a scene, making it impossible to ignore them. So, against my better judgment, I stepped into the lobby. And there they were. The people who had once cut me out of their lives stood before me, smiling as if nothing had changed. Their first words? Not an apology. Not an explanation. Just praise. "We're so proud of you. Your story is inspiring. It's amazing how successful you've become." I stood there, numb, as they gushed about my achievements, as if they had been part of my journey, as if they had the right to celebrate my success. Then they dropped the real reason they were here. They wanted to meet my wife. They wanted to meet their grandson. They wanted back in. I felt sick. For 20 years, they never reached out. Not when I was at my lowest. Not when I was building myself up from nothing. But the moment I made it, suddenly, they remembered they had a son. They accused me of not trying hard enough to reconnect. I let them talk. Not because I cared about their excuses, but because I needed answers. I needed to know why they had abandoned me. And when they finally told me the truth, everything made sense. Amy had been cheating on me with my cousin, and my family had helped her keep it a secret. I sat there, frozen, as my family unraveled the truth they had kept hidden for 20 years. Amy had been cheating on me with Carl, my cousin, a man I had despised since childhood. Carl was the son of my father's older brother, my uncle. Unlike me, he had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. His mother had passed away when he was just a baby, and my uncle had spent his entire life making excuses for him. No one ever held Carl accountable for anything. No one ever told him no. And as it turned out, that included my wife. Amy and Carl had started their affair while we were married. How long had it been going on? I had no idea, but my family knew. And instead of telling me, instead of standing by me, they chose to protect him. Why? Because Carl was my uncle's only son, and my uncle was my father's boss. My father had built his career in the family business, but my uncle had founded it. He controlled everything. So when Carl decided he wanted my wife, my family faced a choice: tell the truth and risk my uncle's wrath or betray me. They chose Carl. They chose power. And they cut me out like I never existed. I stared at them, struggling to process it all. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the lengths they had gone to keep it hidden. They had erased me, blocked my calls, ignored my visits, locked me out of family gatherings. And, worst of all, they let me believe I was alone. Then came the final blow. Amy had been pregnant when she left me. The daughter I never knew existed was now almost 20 years old. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I had a child who had grown up believing Carl was her father. A child who had spent 2 decades under the roof of the people who had betrayed me. My parents tried to justify it. They swore they hadn't wanted to shut me out. They claimed my uncle had forced them to choose between me and their grandchild. But I didn't care. For 20 years, they had known, and they said nothing. And now? Now that I was successful? Now that my name was on TV? Now they wanted back in? I couldn't even look at them. I need you to leave, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. They pleaded, begged me to understand, said it had been difficult for them too. Difficult? They had watched me suffer, watched me break down, watched me struggle to rebuild my life from nothing. And they had done nothing. They had no right to ask for forgiveness. I told them to go. My sister, who had been silent up until now, chose that moment to speak. You wouldn't even be where you are today if it wasn't for us, she said. We gave you the idea for your restaurant's name. I laughed. I actually laughed. 20 years of abandonment, and she thought they deserved credit for my success because they had once suggested a name? Get out, I said, my patience snapping. They refused. They wanted to talk, to work things out. But I didn't. I called security. I watched as they were escorted out of my building. And as they left, they hurled their final desperate plea. We had no choice. No choice. They had a choice every single day for the last 20 years. And they chose wrong. For the next 3 days, they kept trying to reach me. Emails, social media, even showing up outside my office. But I ignored them. I was done. The only thing that mattered now was my daughter. I had spent 20 years believing I had no children. Now I knew the truth. And I had no idea what to do with it. My wife and I debated for hours. Should we reach out? Should we disrupt this girl's life with a truth she might not even want to hear? I had spent 2 decades being erased from her story. Did I have the right to suddenly insert myself back in? I didn't know. But I did know one thing. I couldn't ignore her. So we made a decision. We found her social media. And I sent her a message. A simple, honest message. Telling her who I was. Telling her the truth. And then we waited. The waiting was unbearable. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2. Every morning, I checked my phone, hoping for a response. And every morning, I was met with silence. I told myself to be patient. This wasn't just some casual message, it was life-altering. I had dropped a truth bomb on a girl who had spent 20 years believing another man was her father. She needed time. But that didn't make the waiting any easier. Then, one morning, a notification appeared. A message. From her. My hands trembled as I opened it. I spoke to my mom. She admitted it. Carl isn't my father. You are. That was all she said. No anger. No accusations. Just the raw truth she had just uncovered. Then, another message. I want to meet you. I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My wife, who had been waiting anxiously with me, squeezed my hand. It was happening. My daughter wanted to meet me. We booked a flight for the weekend. She lived in another state, and she didn't have the money to visit us. But that didn't matter. I would have traveled to the ends of the earth for this moment. I barely slept the night before. What if she changed her mind? What if seeing me in person made her resent me? By the time we landed, my heart was pounding. And then there she was. Standing outside the airport, hands stuffed in her jacket pockets, nervously shifting her weight from foot to foot. She looked so much like me it hurt. I had missed her entire childhood. Her first words. Her first steps. Her first day of school. And yet, she was still my daughter. We walked up to her, and for a moment, none of us knew what to do. Then, cautiously, hesitantly, she stepped forward. And hugged me. I closed my eyes and held onto her like I was afraid she would disappear. I'm sorry, I whispered. She pulled back slightly, studying my face. For what? For not being there, I said. For not knowing. She swallowed hard. It wasn't your fault. And just like that, the 20-year gap between us didn't seem so insurmountable anymore. Over dinner, we talked for hours. She told me about her life, how she had always felt like something was off, how Carl had never really acted like a father to her. She had never questioned it before, but now? Now everything made sense. Then, hesitantly, she told me what happened when she confronted Amy. At first, Amy denied everything, tried to gaslight her. But our daughter, was too smart for that. She pressed until Amy finally admitted the truth. She had known all along. And she had lied. For 20 years. Carl had known too. Now, my daughter didn't know what to do. She wasn't ready to cut them out completely, not yet, but she couldn't look at them the same way anymore. I told her she didn't have to figure it all out right away. We would take this slow. Build something real. She also met my wife and our son, her half-brother. She was cautious at first, but by the end of the night, she was laughing with them. For the first time in 2 decades, I had my family back. Meanwhile, my old family, the one that betrayed me, was in chaos. The moment my parents found out I had met my daughter, they broke their promise. The messages started again. The emails. The desperate attempts to talk. My uncle was furious. His perfect little lie had shattered. He blamed my parents for letting the truth slip. Now, my father was panicking, desperate to keep peace with his brother, still too afraid to stand up to him. But I didn't care. I had lost 20 years with my daughter because of their cowardice. They could deal with the fallout on their own. I had more important things to focus on. Moving forward, I don't know what the future holds. My daughter and I still have a long road ahead of us. She needs time to process everything. I need time to make up for lost years. But we're trying. And for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. I won't waste another second dwelling on the people who abandoned me. I have a real family now, and I'm never letting them go.